So, Malcolm, thank you very much for jumping on the security space, mate. Really interesting topic today, actually. So, obviously, we're talking about threat intelligence, but not what you might think. Obviously, you want to kind of go down a different layer and kind of talk about the hidden risks. So, looking forward to that. So, but obviously, before we delve into it, you're actually just give us a quick introduction.
Yeah, hello. Hi, Nick. Yeah, so I'm Malcolm Taylor. I have been in this space for longer than I care to remember, actually. I said to somebody this morning it was 30 years, and in my head I went, no, it's not that long, but actually I think it might be nearly. So that's sort of, that's depressed me a bit. However, I started working for the government. I did a lot of sensitive national security stuff. I was there for about 20 years, and then in 2016 I wanted a different challenge. So I left the government and joined a small private intelligence company, really to grow their cybersecurity practice. It was really tiny at the time, and it was me and one other person. I was the second hire. I did that for 18 months. We got to about 15 people, and we were acquired by a company called ITC Secure. And I moved there. They're still in business. They're still quite well known as an MSSP, doing well, I think. I moved there as part of that acquisition, and I was their director of cybersecurity. I was doing a lot of business development, a lot of selling, a lot of product development, and strategic stuff. And then, for various reasons, I moved out of London, and I was commuting every day from Yorkshire to Canary Wharf, and that was probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my life. It was 6 hours on a LNER train and a tube every day. And then I was accidentally talking to a recruiter, actually, who said, did I know a company called Crisp in Leeds? And I said, no, never heard of them. And he says, have a look. They're looking for somebody who looks a bit like you. And I did that, and I was immediately interested. I was genuinely interested. It wasn't just that the commute was more appealing.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of interviews. They offered me a job, and I jumped at the chance, and I joined. And of course, ironically, given my commute, I joined on the first day of lockdown. So then, for 18 months, I didn't even have to commute into Leeds. So I was, and that was pretty curious. I joined to lead their human intelligence team, and to build it, really, because it was small but growing. It was 40 odd people at the time. It's now 110, I think, depends how you count them. And I've been here ever since and enjoying every minute. We had a big event last year. We were acquired ourselves again. We were bought by Kroll. So we are now part of Kroll Digital. And that's a really exciting, I think it's a really exciting bringing together of all their risk management capability with all of our online risk capability. And there's a real neat convergence of those two things. Super exciting, in fact. And yeah, when you got in touch to ask about this, that was got me thinking about that whole kind of threat intelligence picture, risk management, all that kind of stuff.
Perfect. Cool. No, thank you for that. So, obviously, let's get into sort of the nuts and bolts of it. Then, also, we're talking about threat intelligence today. And what better way to sort of start it is for anyone that might not understand what actually is threat intelligence in cyber and infosec. What actually is it to the everyday man?
I mean, that's a brilliant question, and I think if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 different answers. My answer to that is we're sitting on the biggest trove of information we've ever known, the internet, and there's good, bad, and perhaps largely indifferent on there. And cats, there's a lot of cats. My view of threat intelligence is getting to the bad. and that of course depends who you are, what you care about. But it's information that's online that can be used against you in many different ways, or that warns of some risk or incident coming that you haven't seen. So it's getting under the skin of what you've written yourself and forgotten about, or what other people have written about you, or what other people are saying about you. And it's like, I don't know how to characterize the internet really, but all of humanity is there, is what they used to say on Who's Who, right? And that's true now online, even more so. It's getting to the interesting bits.
Hmm. Hmm. So how actually common is the problem then when it comes to threat intelligence and it comes to, obviously, like you say, human intelligence as well? Is it, what sort of magnitude are we actually talking here?
I think it's huge. I think it's relatively untapped, and I think the cyber bubble, it keeps inflating. I think one of the bits of this whole area, this whole risk area, and it does go beyond cyber into reputation and things
Hmm.
like that, but it's a cyber risk, whether that's a small city or a large city, I'll leave you to decide. But I think it's one of the areas of that that's relatively unexplored and not that well understood yet. So, I mean, on the very overtly cybersecurity end, one of the most famous hacks that's happened in the last 10 years was actually being talked about on a forum openly on the internet before it happened. So there's a piece of potential intelligence that, if you have it, saves, in this case, billions of pounds, personal reputation, commercial reputation, all of those things. Nobody thought to look. Nobody was looking for that threat intelligence. I mean, in that case, because nobody's really given the whole subject a thought, and that's one small example. There are other examples where I've dealt with individuals, high net worths, politically exposed people, and cases where an individual's signature was available online and had been taken and used to forge documents. So a whole range of uses for this stuff, and a whole range of values in finding it and digging it out. But as I say, I think it still is one of the areas of this whole risk area that's just not explored.
And so, obviously, as the world progresses, and it's obviously progressing in technology at an alarmingly fast rate, more and more things are becoming, digitalized, which means we're leaving more and more of a footprint online. Is the security world moving at the same rate in comparison, or are you kind of are you like chasing a big boulder down the hill? Are you kind of like, oh, I just can't catch it because it's going faster and faster? What's it like from your side of the fence?
Yeah. That's an interesting way of putting it. I imagine one of those big see-through balls that people get in and roll down hills,
Yeah,
but
the
that's
more
kind
webs,
of,
yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I couldn't remember what they were called, but that's the whole kind of cyber industry, the whole security industry in a nutshell. I think it's always going to be a case of the problem with the sort of adversary is they're clever people, right? And they innovate and they change, and so you've got to keep up with them the whole time. And I think sometimes the industry is a little bit ahead. I think sometimes the adversaries are a little bit ahead, and it just, they're rolling down the hill together, trying to catch each other. I think, as I say, I think this is one area where we've got further to go, and I think people are beginning to understand that. We're doing more and more work in that area, helping clients understand what the internet says about them that they don't know about. They know about their website, they know about all those sorts of things, but beyond that, what is there? And that's an increasingly common request now, and people are beginning to turn that into a defense, because if you understand, what your attackers can find out about you, you've got a real advantage when it comes to building a defense. So I think it is growing, but like all of that industry, and that sector, it's about keeping up.
Hmm.
It's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah.
That's what makes it fun, though. I think that's what makes it a fun place to be operating. You never quite know what you're dealing with, and every time you undertake a piece of work like this, you you find out something new, you think of some new angle, you see a new way that information on the internet is being harvested and used, and it's fun
Yeah.
mostly.
Well, that's what I kind of want to touch on it. Of course, yes, it's fun, it's interesting, but I also wanted to touch on, just because I've also obviously in my line of work had to recruit some people for like who are sort of threat researchers, XYZ, obviously a few different job titles. Obviously, what does it take a particular type of person to work in this field? Because, like you say, there is a dark side. There is a dark element to the threat intelligence world. Is there a particular sort of character that has to work in that area?
I don't know. You made me feel slightly uncomfortable now. It's like,
It's
what
more
are you
like
saying?
resilient. I don't mean like Oh no, it's more like resilient because there's some dark stuff out there.
Yeah. So yeah. We have a bunch of analysts who have got a mixture of OSINT skills and technical skills, and they look at some pretty dark stuff, and then some pretty grim material across a whole range of threats. We employ a psychologist to help them manage all of that.
Nice.
And I think they need to be curious, they need to be clever, they need to be what we talked about before, about that sort of, we're rolling downhill at speed. You need to be able to move quickly, you need to be able to think quickly, you need to be able to put yourself in the mind of somebody who wants to find this information and use it.
Okay.
And you might, so I suppose in a sense that's think like an attacker, but attacker is a bit grand, so think like an adversary, maybe, is a better way of putting it.
Yeah.
There are people who take that information and use it to damage somebody's reputation. They use it to say, there are people in their supply chain who are abusing human rights in Asia, or damaging the environment in Africa, or whatever it is. They're taking information about that person and using it in an adversarial way. So you need to be able to think like they do.
Yeah.
You do see relatively a lot of people with a background similar to mine, government work where you're doing that kind of thing, and able perhaps to put yourselves a bit more easily in the mindset of somebody who wants to gather this information and use it. So, it's no surprise that intelligence agencies and what have you worldwide, and law enforcement, have an increasingly large open source capability, because there's information out there on the internet they want to find and they want to use it, and they're doing that. And that's exactly what the adversary is doing too. They're looking online, finding information, and they're using it.
Yep. No, that's an interesting way of looking at it. And when we previously spoke, obviously before the pod, you mentioned that it's not just these breaches. It can be as simple as sort of open source information, like you say, talk on social medias, on forums, on dark web chats. That's all out there. So what is it that you guys actually do about that then? Because surely you can't police everything. No, can you? I don't know.
Well, clearly, intelligence is an art, not a science, I guess, is one way of putting it. You need to know where to look. You need to know what to look for. You need to be able to understand the subtle signs, because not all these things are overt. You do miss things, of course, but it's about getting the maximum bang you can for whatever it is that the client is spending, and that's about diligence, innovation, clever people. We have 57 languages in our 100 and something people, and the same word in different languages means different things, not because it's translated differently, but because it's used in different ways. And so all that sort of cultural, linguistic knowledge is super important. It gives you the best chance of getting a comprehensive study. But yeah, you miss things, of course you do. That's normal, I think. It's usual, I suppose, that you get the sense of direction, and you might miss the nuances around it. But it's what I said at the start. The internet's enormous, and nobody can hope to police the internet.
So, where do you kind of obviously, because like you obviously lead a very, very big team, and you've got different outcomes that you need to hit. Like, where does the line stop? Where there's clearly so much out there, but you can only do so much. How do you prioritize your, specific targets when it comes to threat intel?
It's a mixture of things, really. It's the risk areas that we're looking for, and that will depend on the client that we're working with. So that might be missing disinformation, it might be hateful information, it might be illegal sale of drugs online, it might be that immediately narrows things down. It can be about reputation, it can be a client saying, we've got people who are threatening to come after us for a reputational issue. It can be clients who are worried that they've inadvertently taken those on. So big, long supply chains, they reach right across the globe now. It's really hard for a customer at one end to say that, they don't abuse human rights, they don't have slave labor, they don't damage the environment, they don't use too much single-use plastic, all of those sorts of things, the kind of classic ESG risks. It's very hard for them to know that. So they'll engage people like us to look for them and say to them, this company in your supply chain is is abusing its people, it's making them work long hours, it's not paying them properly. And the classic example, I guess, is you'll see very often, or not very often, you'll see from time to time, you'll see fashion houses accused of using slave labor in places like Bangladesh.
Yep.
And it's not that they want to do that, quite the opposite. It's just they're unable to control great long supply chains. So having people like us able to look into those supply chains and understand those risks right down the chain is really valuable. It enables them to cut contracts, change the way people work, engage to make things better. And we live in a world now where the whole ESG and human rights and environmental and sustainability, those are not only becoming things that people aim for because they don't want to do harm, they see them as a differentiator.
Yeah.
So, you see companies saying, we will be carbon neutral by 2021, and that things like that they need to understand their supply chain, and that then they need to understand all those companies, and they use people like us to get under the skin of that kind of stuff. And most of the answers to what they want to know are online, actually.
Yeah. And who is it that's actually carrying out these attacks?
It varies such a lot. I mean, some of them are competitors, some of them are people who feel they've got an axe to grind with a particular client. That could be because they think the client's done them wrong, or they've had an unsatisfactory experience with them, etc. It can be bigger than that. So, the question of the use of Uyghur labor in China is now protected by law in the US. It's illegal to import goods into the US made using labor from that part of China because of the assessment that there's a large scale risk that they're enslaved and treated very badly. And the US government has responded to it. In that sense, it's governmental. Journalists do it, campaigners do it, and companies themselves do it because they want to have those differentiators that I talked about. They want to say, we're different. We don't damage the environment. We don't have, it's how they stand out. It's how they try and stand out.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so it's very multifaceted, this, obviously, what we're talking about. So with that being said, has it always been a problem? Has your field of threat intelligence always sort of been around since there's been, even computers, or has it just recently expanded in the last 5-10 years? What's the sort of rate in this area?
I think it has accelerated. I mean, it's always been there, I guess, but it's accelerating, driven by a number of things. Driven by, firstly, penetration of the internet. More and more people are online. It's a bigger and bigger problem. There are not many people who haven't got a digital footprint now.
Yeah.
If you haven't, you probably live on a remote island in Scotland or something. And so that's so there's just the internet's getting bigger. The recognition that you can use it for good and bad is getting bigger. But I think the real change is that in the reputation sense, which is where we see a lot of growth at the moment, is where it is the drive by companies to be seen to do no harm. Is that ESG, that compliance that they're striving for, and that just gives them there's a real impetus behind all of that. The use of slave labor is a big question. It's now on. Those sorts of things are now on boards, risk committees. Have we got that sort of labor in our supply chain?
Yeah.
And it's really important that they try and find out. So it is growing. It's much more common. I think it will get more common still. I think it started with individuals worrying about their safety and their security.
Yep.
We did a piece of work last year with a reasonably prominent person in the US who'd been threatened, who wanted to know what risk there was out there. And one of the risks that we found for them was on a Saturday, they would go for a run and post where they were going. And say, I'm going on this trail, I might see you there.
Yep.
And if you're worried about being kidnapped or attacked, that's not a clever thing to do, really. But people do it without thinking because the internet enables it, right? And the internet gets clever all the time. As you said, this pace of change is phenomenal. And so, I always think with cyber that, why is it a problem? And I think the user, I'm not victim blaming at all, but we as users demand that things are quick.
Yeah.
We demand that things are cool. We demand that things change all the time. And latterly, we now demand they're secure. But actually, those three things were where we started. We were like, hey, the internet's cool. It needs to be fast. It needs to change. I need to get an app.
Yep.
And then we sort of said, oh, yeah, and we don't want to get attacked or hacked or whatever, bolted on the end. And that, latterly, on the security side, that's what people are doing. They're now making it more secure. But the whole data piece is a little bit behind that, I think.
Yeah. And I've always wondered, like, is there specific sectors that are more prone to it? Because when on the surface, when I first had that thought, it was like, well, yeah, probably FS sector because of bank details, this and that. But then when you started to actually sit down and think about it a little bit more, it's like you see all these things like, oh, maybe even just like these retail clients that maybe not have as secure systems as FS. Let me put my tongue back in. And but you can still get like addresses and like date of birth, XYZ, and identity fraud is just as sort of lucrative in terms of like the dark market.
Yeah.
So am I right with that thought process, or am I a little bit off? What's your sort of thoughts on when it comes to sort of sectors?
Yeah, I mean, the financial, you have to think about motivation, I think, and money is always one. And, we see information that's out there that's reputationally damaging that people have tried to sell for money. So financial is a key motivator, as it always is. Ideology, all those sorts of things. But we really see it affecting every sector. I mentioned clothing. You mentioned supermarkets. 100%. Supermarkets, wherever they get their apples from or whatever. Apple's probably not a great example, but you know what I mean. That you wouldn't think about that being something that could damage the reputation of a company, but it absolutely is. So we see it in pharma, we see it in retail, we see it in fashion, we see it in financial services, we see it in chemicals, we see it in electronics. The electronics industry at the moment, just the renewable industry relies on mining around the world. It relies on lithium and solar panels, and a lot of the raw materials are sourced in Africa. They're sourced in China. They're actually sourced in Xinjiang province in China, which is where the Uyghurs are, which is one of the biggest problems we see in terms of slavery. So that booming industry has got those big issues right at the heart of it. So we see it in all sectors, really. Not many we don't, to be honest. Sport, we're doing a lot with football clubs. We're looking at how, and this is slightly different, but this is about the way the internet is used to spread racism and hate and all those sorts of things. So pretty much every sector has got this problem with the availability of data and the availability to get data and content instantly published.
Yeah. And just one last question from me, to be honest with you, Malcolm, is and it's completely left field, and I've not given you the heads up about this, and obviously we we know that the rate of change is extraordinary, but I want to kind of ask, what do you kind of see for the next 5 years, like threat intelligence? What are some of the risks that we need to be aware of with, I don't know, upcoming policies or upcoming technologies or upcoming legislation changes that you're going to be like having to be on your toes about it? Because the key thing about your area is adaptability and being able to change like that. So what's your sort of thoughts for the next 5 years?
Blimey. I thought you were kind in the run up to this. I'm not wrong. So I think the online harms bill will have an impact. That will change potentially the way that particularly the platforms engage with information they're carrying. I think the Digital Services Act in the EU will have a similar impact. And the Digital Markets Act, the two pieces of legislation together, they're the sort of, but I suppose the easiest way to think about them is the sort of GDPR for content. It's not a great analogy, but it helps to frame it a bit, I think. I think it will be, I think bigger than those will be the markets, and the markets will drive companies to manage their reputation better and manage the risks around them. It will be that thing I talked about companies beginning to use it as a differentiator. I think that will become the norm. And I think if you have got problems in supply chains, if you've got problems in companies that you work with, third-party relations, etc., I think they'll get found out, they'll get exposed, and so you need to think about managing them now. And I don't see that changing, to be honest. So I think that sort of market-driven change will be the biggest factor.
Nice.
The internet won't change. It's silly to say that, but the problem is always going to be there, and it will change, and it will be different, and it will morph, but it will always be there. So it's about how you respond to it, I guess.
Perfect. No, and what a great way to finish it. Yeah, well dealt with the last question. So Malcolm, thank you so much for your time. I'll put, like all the other podcasts, all Malcolm's sort of details in which you need to, if you need to give him a sort of question or anything that you might have piqued your interest, I'll put it in the description for this video. But other than that, thank you so much again, Malcolm.